Well, I've gone through the efforts of looking up what my password is for changing the clock again, and it's a pretty good one. Not even kidding. That's actually what it was. I don't know how that worked out. So, this is going to be a bit of a weird one. Basically, there's been a fair amount of off-screen crap. Let me go ahead and get this clock set to something. It doesn't even really matter what it is. So, we're going to start out just in totally the wrong place here, and I'm going to at least get to where I want to be while I can provide some live commentary, because there's probably not going to be much of that in this video. Yesterday, I recorded some of this, and I basically caught 10 Pokemon that I was missing, and I figured I'll do something with this footage later, but I don't really know what. Also, what is the star you holding? Okay, well, I can maybe try and sell that later. Not a massive problem right now, though. So yeah, let me get this Furo so I can have something with Fly just to save time. But, yeah, it's, like, it's kind of hard to figure out how to fit in some of the stuff that I need to do in this playthrough because there's just no real sense of pacing to any of it. 10 bios that I need to do is going to take up 40 minutes. And so I'm basically going to try my best to just kind of fit it into this video where I can. Along with probably like another 5 or so that I end up catching here. Basically, don't expect any major progress in this one. I'm going to be just kind of revisiting some old areas, and it won't be completely worthless, but we're not going to like get any further in the like main story, I guess. Not that there's really a whole lot of a story in this game, but whatever. So, let's go to Violet City. By the time it took me to get that Furo and teach it to HM and come back, I probably could have just biked here, but whatever. And immediately put it back in, because we need HMs. And speaking of HMs, I'm going to want Flash for this. And because Basil is basically, at this point, not a team member, I feel okay with teaching it Flash. It's kind of just there for reasons. Like, I have another dedicated Flash user, but, like, whatever. I'm okay with this. As you can see, I also taught Headbutt. Yeah, just... I hate to do that. I feel kind of dirty teaching a starter in HM as shitty as Flash, but... oh well. Alright, I don't have my bike equipped. So, what we're doing right now is heading to the Dark Cave, because there's a few Pokemon that I can get there, so we're immediately adding more onto this list that I have to go through. I do have footage of me catching the other 10, and I'm going to basically try to insert that where I can. But as for the order that I'm going to be going through these, I don't really know for sure yet. We'll just figure it out. So, I've talked about Dark Cave a little bit before, I think, how basically it's totally useless. I've obviously been here already, I just kind of cleared out some items. I had to get Dunsparce here once it started swarming. For the record, swarms are still a thing that I need to get in a couple places. I haven't gotten Quillfish or Yanma to show up. Yanma I could still encounter with the 10% or 1% encounter rate, but I'm just hoping to get the swarm for it. But what the Dark Cave does have is basically an area with a few Pokemon in it that you can't really get anywhere else. And it serves as a shortcut that doesn't help you, is really the best way to put it. Now, usually I like to wait until the Pokemon shows up on screen before I, like, say what it is I'm looking for, but, I'm gonna go ahead and break tradition here because I want to talk about it now. Oh, okay, never mind, there it is. So yeah, we came here for Wobbuffet, and it is a female, so that actually works well with my typical naming scheme on these. So, if you've watched my other Pokemon LPs, you may notice that I have a tendency to name these Heather, And that's basically just a tradition at this point that I've never really explained. And... oh, good, it's dead. Okay. So we're gonna try to get another one then. I guess that gives me more time to explain it. Before I even talk about that whole thing, I'd like to point out that Wobbuffet's also partially responsible for me discovering internet forums, because, also, Graveler's a new Pokemon, I need to catch this. Hopefully this thing doesn't have self-destruct. It probably does. But, basically, I had the Gold and Silver strategy guide back in the day, but it is not all that great. Oh, yeah, good. Because it doesn't tell you where to find Pokemon after a certain point in the game. Like, really early on, basically. And so, there's some that it just doesn't mention at all, and Wobbuffet is one of them. I knew it existed, because I knew what all the new Pokemon were, I just didn't know where to find it. And so, I eventually, I'd say that I Googled it, but that would be incorrect, because I don't think Google was a thing yet, or if it was, it wasn't popular. So I probably dogpiled it, more accurately. And I found a website called Pokemasters.com, which was basically an online Pokedex, similar to kind of like Cerebi and that kind of thing. And I found out that it was in Dark Cave, and that's really the end of that story. But I liked that website because it was a good resource, but I didn't realize that it had a message board, because I had never gone to message boards before. I didn't know what they were, and I always just kind of overlooked that section of the site. And eventually I linked my cousin to it, or like I told him it was like .net instead of .com or something, and he went to it and found the message board part of it and wasn't really sure what it was either and was confused. He's like, I thought this had like a Pokedex and stuff. And so I looked at it a little bit and I'm like, oh, actually this is kind of cool. It's like a bunch of people talking about the game, and I might look at this at some point. And so I ended up spending a huge amount of time reading through all the rules of the website and learning how to use all the, like... they weren't emoticons, I don't think that term existed yet either, but, like, just the Pokemon icons that you could use and stuff like that. I, like, researched the shit out of this site before I started using it because I didn't want to break any rules. And that was my first forum experience. My username was Jish11988. And, that was how I found the Ultimate Board of Cool Stuff, which was where the Bargo the Big Dip trilogy was posted and all that stuff, so it was just kind of an important stepping stone. And it all came because Wobbuffet is in an obscure area of the game, and my strategy guide didn't mention it. I'm sure there's probably more to that story. I might even come back to it later if I think of something, but that's basically all you have to know for now, I guess. So as for the Heather thing, getting into overly personal stories that I have no reason to explain to anyone. Basically, she was just somebody that I knew online that I had a crush on, and her favorite Pokemon was Wobbuffet, and there was, like, a bit of a falling out between us. I'm debating how in-depth I should go into this story, because it's kind of embarrassing, but basically she already had, like, a boyfriend or a fiance, and so, like, I respected that, but she still knew that I liked her, and I was just sure to not be, like, a creep about it most of the time. But, there was a point where apparently he was, like, being this massive dick, and she was, like, actually debating leaving him, and so she, like, asked for my input, and I'm like, well, I mean, from what you've told me, I can maybe understand why you would, like... I don't know the full story, probably, but yeah, he sounds like kind of an asshole. I don't know if you want to marry this guy. And then apparently she, like, the next day decided that she didn't like that answer and basically refused to ever talk to me again after that because she thought that I was, like, trying to, like, get her for myself, I guess is the best way to put that, which was not really my intent. But, I mean, I guess I can see why it seemed that way, but that was the last time we ever spoke. And this was back in, like, 2008, maybe? It was before Brawl came out, because I know that we we're looking forward to that game coming out and like playing it online, and then never got a chance to. But either way, it's like the name has a legacy now, so just Wobbuffet is always Heather. I don't know. So obviously, just kind of fighting some random trainers here. This is what I mean when I said the shortcut is completely useless, because it doesn't do anything for you. It leads back to New Barktown, and you fight like 3 trainers, and that's about it. But we've already seen both new Pokemon in the area, Graveler and Wobbuffet. There is a third one that can show up in the daytime, and once I catch both of those, I'm going to probably change the clock. Oh shit, except now that I've beaten trainers, my password isn't 01234 anymore. Damn it, that sucks. I'm gonna have to look it up again. Or I could just not catch the third Pokemon, that's also fine by me. No. Sorry. Alright, but yeah, I think I can like loop around and fight another person here also, but we'll worry about that later. So anyway, I don't know how long I'm going to be doing bios, but we're going to be doing them for a while, starting now. Aipom is another one of Gen 2's sort of unnecessary additions. It's a single-stage, normal-type Pokemon with a somewhat unconventional way of finding it, and a very unimpressive moveset. People like to point out Dunsparce as being one of the most useless Gen 2 Pokemon, and just one of the more forgettable ones in general, but I find that Aipom's actually quite a bit worse. I might be slightly biased because I like Dunsparce, but with Aipom, it really doesn't learn any moves that are worth a damn, as far as I can tell. Its level up move pool, even as of Gen 7, the strongest moves that it can get is Swift, not counting Last Resort, which is kind of a gimmicky move. It can get some other stuff through TMs, because as with most normal types, it does pick up a lot of things of other types, but even then, it's still usually not anything too terribly impressive. And its stats, it has like decent speed, mediocre attack, and pretty much bad everything else, so you really had basically no motivation whatsoever to use this in the game that it debuted in, and it didn't really get any more of a point until Gen 4, but we'll talk about that in a minute. As for this thing's design, it's pretty obviously just a monkey. It's based off of possibly a squirrel monkey. There's certain monkeys that have prehensile tails that they use for climbing and swinging and stuff. That's most known on the spider monkey. The squirrel monkey just kind of uses the tail for balance, but it also has a face similar to Aipom, so that's the one that it's closest to. And the fact that it has like a weird gloved hand on the end of its tail is just kind of a reference to the whole prehensile tail, using it as an extra arm type thing. And the name is basically just ape and palm, but spelled weirdly, and the Japanese name is the same thing. So, in the anime, in the Battle Frontier season, which was at the end of Gen 3 basically, an Aipom just kind of suddenly started showing up as a recurring character, and then Ash caught it toward the end of the season for no apparent reason, and people speculated that he probably did this because it was going to be getting a new evolution in Gen 4, and that turned out to be the case, because in Gen 4 we got Ambipom. The evolution method is a lot less tedious than a lot of Gen 4 evolutions. You basically just have to learn the move Double Hit, which it gets at level 32. It's kind of weird because that basically just makes it the same as a level up evolution, but with like an asterisk next to it. Like if you use the move relearner in Gen 7, which lets you learn any move at any time, you can get Double Hit from the start and basically evolve it that way, or you could breed it on there, so you could skip the first stage and just go straight to Ambipom if you wanted. But they basically just do that to avoid having to retcon, like why couldn't it evolve before? You could still ask why it didn't learn Double Hit before, but whatever. As far as I can tell, Ambipom is also fairly unremarkable. It's obviously a normal type, so it just kind of is sort of the jack of all trades, except it doesn't really even do that well as far as I can tell. The only Smogon moveset that I could see for it was just called Don't Use Ambipom. So, while I'm sure it does have its fans, I can't say that I'm one of them. It's just kind of... It has like the creepy, cymbal-banging monkey, shit-eating grin face, and also has 2 giant udders. I don't know why. So yeah, not my favorite, and can't say I'll ever plan on using one. Heracross is another single-stage Gen 2 Pokemon, but unlike most of the other ones that fall into that category, it's actually quite well-liked and is actually useful. A good reason for this is the fact that it's one of the first bug types to actually be, like, good in battle really at all. Because in Gen 1 we had a number of bug types that were just kind of meh, and then also Scyther and Pinsir, which had decent stats but not really much of a moveset to use them with. Whereas Heracross has the stats, but it also has some good moves, because it is part fighting, and it does get some fighting moves, so it can make use of that. But it also is the first Pokemon to have an actual good bug-type move, which is Mega Horn. It does take until the 50s before it learns Mega Horn. In later generations it was lowered a bit, but basically if you can stick with it long enough, or if you're using it for competitive, then yeah, Mega Horn's a good move. It's base 120 power, has no downsides. Bug is a type that is surprisingly good against a number of different types, so it's just generally a solid choice if you can find one and bother raising it up that high. So Heracross is obviously a beetle. It is named after the Hercules beetle, or more accurately, Heracles, the alternate name for Hercules. But it doesn't really look like a Hercules beetle. It's actually more like the Japanese rhinoceros beetle, or the Kabutomushi. I don't really know too much about beetles, but I know that they're pretty big in Japan. Just collecting and fighting them and whatnot, and the concept of bug collecting was sort of the inspiration behind Pokemon in general. So Heracross is kind of important in that sense, I guess. But I don't know, for me it was always just a pretty standout design. Just in terms of it being a good bug type, that's really all it needed to stand out to me. We did get more useful bug types later on, and there is at least one other good bug type in Gen 2, but I don't know, Heracross is always just the one that it was sort of a counterpart to Pinsir, and was superior to Pinsir in basically every way, and so I just generally thought of it as being good. It was also something that Ash got fairly early on in the anime, but it was mostly known just for sort of violating Bulbasaur. And speaking of the anime, at some point it got a little bit of a redesign where the line going across its face between the eyes changed from being like a mouth line to sort of the indication of where a lump is. The horn is basically part of a lump and the mouth is not visible. It's really kind of weird, and then they changed it back, so I don't know what was up with that. But anyway, as far as name goes, I already pretty much explained it. Just Heracles and cross, because it has a cross-shaped horn. Japanese name is the same. And the Mega Evolution, which it got in X and Y, actually is based off of the Hercules beetle, but also a car or something. I don't really know what it's going for. It's kind of like a mech. It has this weird ventilation shaft on it, and the arms are just kind of big and bulbous and possibly supposed to be like turrets or something. I don't really know. It's kind of a weird design. Not one of my favorites. I feel like it falls into the pile of over-designed Mega Evolutions. But it's not completely worthless. It gets the ability Skill Link, which basically makes multi-hit moves always hit 5 times. And multi-hit moves are not always the most useful to have, but because Mega Heracross has such a ridiculously high attack stat, it can actually make use of those fairly well for breaking through substitutes and stuff like that. So it kind of fills a little niche role. But overall, I approve of Heracross. I have used one before. It's just a shame that it takes a while to really get good. Graveler is one of those Gen 1 Pokemon that I don't ever really think about. I sort of just take it for granted that it exists. Get it? Granted? No, that actually wasn't intentional. But, I don't know. What is there to say about Graveler? It's the middle form between Geodude and Golem. It's still a rock ground type. And it is a rock monster. There's not any kind of, animal or mythological basis behind it. The name is just gravel. It makes things into gravel, so therefore it's a Graveler. And its Japanese name is Golone, which is basically golem plus stone, so There's not really any hints there as to whether it's based on anything in particular, but I don't think it is. I think it's pretty much just a rock monster. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. As I've said a number of times before, I don't mind Pokemon that are just sort of their own original creations. There's surprisingly few of those in the later generations. A lot of things are just basically take an animal and change it slightly. So Graveler is its own unique thing, but it just also is forgettable. I don't know. It basically shows up in like almost every game other than Gen 5, because Geodude is generally always in the regional decks, so it's the sort of thing that you'll find in late game caves. It's usually in Victory Road, and so when you get to the end of the game and you're trying to grind for the Elite Four, it's pretty likely that you'll KO a bunch of these with your grass and water types, because it dies to those really easily, and will basically serve to be a pain for anything that doesn't have a super effective move against it, because it has high defenses and it can blow up. So, like I said, you'll encounter it plenty of times, it's unlikely if you'll really pay attention to it, I guess. I usually don't mention Alolan forms at all, because they're kind of their own thing, and I just don't usually feel the need to, but because I've got nothing else for Graveler, I'll mention that it looks like the Jiggy Boulder from Banjo-Tooie, because it basically is regular Graveler, but with some random yellow chunks inside it, which I guess are supposed to be gold, even though the whole idea of it is that it's magnetic, and gold isn't magnetic, so I'm not sure why that's there. But it's a follow-up to Geodude, which is just it's Geodude, but with hair. This one is Graveler, but with hair and gold in it, and then Alolan Golem is weird Russian beard with cannon back thing. I don't really know what's going on with that one either, but I kind of like it. So I don't see the need in dragging this one out any longer than I need to. It's an okay design. It serves the purpose of basically being a decent final stage if you're not able to trade evolve it. This is actually the first of the 4 like Gen 1 trade evolutions that I'm going to be talking about, so they all kind of have that distinction. I don't know if that was intentional, where the second form looks fine on its own. But yeah, that's about all I can say about Graveler. Wobbuffet is a really, really weird one to talk about. To start with, it's a psychic type, and it doesn't really make use of this typing at all, because it doesn't have any attacks, but we'll get to that later. Its design is weird. It's a big blue blob thing with 4 feet that kind of like cluster together like a tripod almost, and it has a black tail with eyes on it that apparently it tries desperately to hide, and that's why it lives in the dark. And it's theorized that the tail houses the brain and is basically the majority of like the Pokemon anyway, and then the rest of the blue body is just sort of like a big dummy that it uses to attract attacks. I don't know, it's weird. So let's look at the name. It's Wobble and Buffet. Buffet basically just means like to strike repeatedly, so that basically just refers to it being a punching bag. Doesn't explain anything else about it though. And the Japanese name is Sonance, which basically translates to "that's the way it is." And as for why it's called that, basically the accepted theory is that it's a tribute to a Japanese comedian named Sanpei Hayashiya, which apparently he was kind of known for doing a salute and then saying "Sonansu Okasan," which is "that's the way it is, ma'am." I don't know what this has to do with a punching bag, but there you go. So, whenever Team Rocket does their motto and then Wobbuffet randomly pops out and yells his name, it is not translatable at all in English, but in Japanese he's basically just saying "that's the way it is," and that's also what he's saying every other time he pops up and yells his name. So it works in Japanese, but not so much in English. I don't know about the other languages. But yeah, that's basically as far as I can go on this thing's design, other than it's also potentially based off of the Okiagari Koboshi doll, which is basically a Weeble. You push it down and it comes back up. It has the same kind of face that Wobbuffet does, so fair enough. But But yeah, where Wobbuffet kind of gets even weirder is with the in-game use of it, basically. Because it is purely defensive. It does not have any attacks that can actually do direct damage. Its base moveset is Counter, Mirror Coat, Safeguard, and Destiny Bond. Never learns any other attacks, can't learn any TMs. So, in Gen 2, it was basically useless, because if you were fighting against one, if you had the patience for it, you could just switch out about 100 times until it runs out of PP, and then kill it that way. Or you could just kind of deal with it and just use whatever, like just use an attack and hope that it doesn't counter it, or kill it through poison or something. But in Gen 3 it got a lot more formidable, because that was when it got the Shadow Tag ability, which prevents the opponent from switching out. So basically, at that point you are forced to attack it, and it'll probably counter your attacks back at you and kill you because it does more damage, and it might take a couple Pokemon before you can finish it off. But it is actually made even worse, because in Gen 3 it also gained Encore, which forces the opponent to use the same move over and over again, so you know which counter move to use, or if you trap it into like a status move, then you can switch out and attack it with your next Pokemon. It gets Encore through Why Not, which is its pre-evolution. You breed it with a Lax Incense to get that. And Why Not, it's a whole other thing, because that one actually does have a name that makes sense in English, because it's literally just Why Not. So when you get the two of them together and they just talk to each other, or they're just repeatedly saying, "That's the way it is, why not?" over and over again. I don't know, it's weird. What else is there to say about this one? It's kind of just one of the more iconic Gen 2 Pokemon. It's been around for forever in the show. It was just kind of thrust onto Jesse's team for no real reason, replacing Lickitung, and it stuck around and just sort of made its presence known. And apparently it did leave the team in the Black and White season, when Team Rocket kind of got like dark and edgy, and therefore nobody liked them anymore. But then they became comedic again, and Wobbuffet came back, and it's been around ever since. And so it has actually been the third most often recurring Pokemon after Pikachu and Meowth. So good for it, I guess. Ursaring is the evolution of Teddiursa, and much like Teddiursa, it's just kind of another normal type, but at the very least it's a normal type that isn't just a one-off and isn't an early route garbage Pokemon. It's actually somewhat decent. You could do a lot worse, but you could also do a lot better. It's just kind of a middle-of-the-road normal type that does things that normal types usually do. It has a pretty good attack stat, and it can get the usual strong normal type moves that you'd expect, and also occasional other TM moves. So it can make use of stuff like Earthquake, Brick Break, that kind of thing. But I don't know, personally I've just never had that much interest in normal types. Anytime that I do choose to use one, it's usually just for the sake of using a normal type for once. I did use an Ursaring once in XD, just because you get a Teddiursa early on, and I figured I'd give it a shot. It worked okay, there was nothing wrong with it, it just wasn't really all that spectacular, I guess. And fittingly, the design of this one is also not all that spectacular. It pretty much is just a bear, just like how Teddiursa was just a bear. It's kind of just a hybrid of a few different types of bears. You can look at it and just easily say, like, it's a grizzly bear and move on, but it is also based off of the sun bear or the Asian black bear, even though it's not black. Apparently the Asian black bear is the one that is kind of considered to be its basis, just because of the marking that it has and the fact that it is mostly known for walking on two legs, which the Asian black bear can also do. I don't know, as far as I'm concerned, it's just a bear with a ring on it that doesn't really have any significance. Like, the two of them have this whole like moon theme or constellation theme to them, because they're named after like Ursa Major, Ursa Minor. They have like, Teddiursa has the moon on it. This one you could say has the new moon, or like an eclipsed moon or something, or it's just a ring. Like they never do anything with it, so I'm not really sure what they're going for there. And like I said, the name is just Ursa and ring. You can't really get much plainer than that. Japanese name is Ringuma, which is, again, just ring, and then Kuma, which means bear. So, like, I'm not sure what else to say about this one. It's okay, but it's kind of just unremarkable. It could probably use something else to stand out, but not every Pokemon's going to be amazing. So if you like bears, you'll probably like this one. I know Vintage Beef did when he caught one, but if you don't care for bears, you're probably not going to care for this one. There's a couple other bear Pokemon introduced in later generations. You have Beware from Gen 7, you have Beartic from Gen 5, and you have Pangoro from Gen 6, and all of them have like a secondary type and are just generally more interesting. So I guess if you want to use a bear, you can pick this one, but you might also pick one of those. I don't know. I'm gonna go ahead and jump in here. I know it's just in the middle of a random battle and not anything significant, but that should have been long enough for 5 bios, so I'm assuming that I did the 3 that I just caught, Wobbuffet, Graveler, and Ursaring, plus Aipom and Heracross from the off-screen stuff. If I didn't, then I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but just kind of wanted to point out a few things here before we go back into doing more bios. As you can tell, I have Iron Tail on David's moveset now. I got that TM from Jasmine last time, and I said I wanted to clone it before I used it, so that was one of the things I did off-screen. I cloned that along with Headbutt. I know you can buy more Headbutts, I'm just trying to save money. God damn, that Ursaring took a lot of balls before it stayed in. It used both of my Great Balls and, what was that, like, at least 10 Pokeballs, like, I know I had like 29 when I started. I think Wobbuffet stayed in the first one, so it was at least 8. But, you know, let's go ahead and actually teleport here, because I keep forgetting I have teleport. It should send me to Violet. So, I wanted to point out something with the Aipom and Heracross there, mainly the Heracross. In Gen 2, the Headbutt trees are kind of weird. They work off of a, like, common encounter / rare encounter system, where, basically each area has certain Pokemon that can appear from the trees. Like, usually foresty areas have kind of like the bug types, and then they'll have, like, Execute, Pineco, I think. I don't really know the loadout that well, but there's foresty areas and then there's mountain areas, and some of the areas that you think shouldn't be mountain areas still are. I don't know. That's at least how my strategy guide listed them. But the mountain areas can have Heracross and Aipom in them, and not every tree can give you every Pokemon, because it has to be, like, some of them only show up in the rare trees, and Heracross is one of those. And basically, for you to get a rare tree, you have, why am I going here? I guess I'll have to set this as a teleport spot or something. I don't think I need to heal, but whatever. Unless I didn't heal in Violet, I don't even remember. But either way, what am I doing? You basically have a 1 out of 10 chance of getting a rare tree, but it's not quite that easy. It has to do with your trainer ID, and it's like, depending on some equation that uses the ID, it then sets, like, the top leftmost tile of the map to a certain number, and then going right from that, it counts up from 0 to 9 and then resets, and then, like, continues where it left off in the next row, basically. And it does this throughout the entire map, and you have, like, 1 lucky number, and so when you headbutt a tree that is on a tile with your lucky number, then it's a rare tree. And so there is a calculator for this. Apparently certain sets are luckier, like, certain IDs are luckier than others. Like, you might actually get one that doesn't give you access to Heracross or any rare trees until, like, really late in the game. My lucky number happens to be 0, though, which worked out fairly well, because I had access to stuff relatively easily. Ilex Forest is kind of weird, though. The calculator that I use doesn't get that area correctly. And in Gold and Silver, you can find Butterfree and Beedrill in basically any, like, forest area tree. But in Crystal, it's only an Ilex Forest. And so, I tried to find the tree that would have those, but it wasn't on, like, number 0. I think for me it was actually on 6. I just happened to find by accident. And so, like, I found the tree that has Pineco in it. I caught that. But both Butterfree and Beedrill are a 5% encounter rate, and it's extremely rare to even get anything from the tree at all. It's like I'd headbutt it 10 times and maybe get, like, 1 or 2 encounters. So, I'm going to be holding off on those until I get to Kanto, when they'll be a little bit easier to encounter. But anyway, now that I'm done explaining that, let's go back to more bios, because I don't think I'm going to be doing anything of note for quite a while, so I'll see you in a bit. Pineco, as its name suggests, looks like a pine cone, and looks like it would be a grass type, but it is neither. It is actually a bagworm, and it is a bug type. If you're not sure what a bagworm is, you're probably not alone in that, because they're fairly unknown outside of Japan, as far as I can tell. For some reason, Japanese culture has sort of a fascination with these things. And so, if you do know what one is, it's probably fairly likely that you've learned of it through either Pokémon or some other sort of Japanese product. I know they show up in Animal Crossing also, and I'm sure they're in plenty of other things. But basically, a bagworm is a type of moth larva that is known for creating a structure that can sometimes look like a pine cone. Whereas most caterpillars will basically create a cocoon or a chrysalis when they're ready to change into a butterfly or a moth. These just sort of do it to make a home for themselves, and there's a number of different types out there, and they can make make the casings out of different materials, which explains our other bagworm Pokemon, Burmy. There's a lot of interesting reasons why Burmy, Wormadam, and Mothim are the way they are, but unfortunately that's not what we're talking about here. But yeah, basically that's just kind of what they do. They create these little houses for themselves, usually hanging off of trees or buildings or whatever, and are actually not as immobile as you might think, because they can move the casings around with them. They're kind of neat. But besides that, it is also based partially off of a grenade, and that is entirely irrelevant to the whole bagworm aspect of it, but it's worth noting anyway. So, as far as name goes, Pineco is fairly obvious. It's just Pinecone. They didn't even attempt to give it any kind of additional meaning. Japanese name is Kunugidama, which is a combination of Kunugi, sawtooth oak, so basically just a type of tree, and Tama, which means ball. But as for it being a grenade, that is just sort of related to its use in battle, because it's another one of those Pokemon that's kind of known for exploding, along with Geodude and Voltorb. But it also has more use beyond that, because as with many bug-type Pokemon, it's not necessarily too terribly strong on its own, but it does actually have a fair amount of use as a utility Pokemon. One of its signature moves is Spikes, which, if you don't know, basically creates a terrain hazard for the opponent's side. Whenever they switch Pokemon, they'll take damage from the spikes. It can also learn Rapid Spin, which is a fairly unremarkable, weak, normal move, aside from the fact that it clears out spikes. And in the later generations, it can learn the other spike-like variants, so Toxic Spike, Stealth Rock. And then, of course, it gets Self-Destruct Explosion, so it basically is good for setting up hazards, clearing hazards, and then exploding when it doesn't have any other use. So, not something you want to attack with directly, and you're not going to have a great time using it in-game, probably, but it definitely has its use in the metagame, or at least its evolution does. And, it's also possibly, like, this is somewhat off-subject, but it's also possibly, based off of, Makibishi, which is basically sort of a... what would you even call that? It's sort of a thing that ninjas would use. It's sort of like shrapnel bomb thing that lays spikes around. So, I don't know. Pineco has a bunch of weird, somewhat unconnected bases, but I don't know, it works for what it is. It's kind of a shame that so much of that was lost from the English name, just saying it's a pine cone, deal with it. But if you take the time to look into its origins, I guess you can be surprised with what you learn. I don't know, it's kind of cool. I don't know if I'll ever use one, but it works for what it is. Execute is another really, really weird design. It's probably the strangest one in all of Gen 1, and that's kind of saying something. And I've said a million times before, I kind of like the strange design, so I am fine with Execute. So what is it? It's basically a group of 6 eggs with faces that hang around each other, and they're not actually eggs, they're seeds. Also, they're psychic. So there's like a lot of unrelated stuff going on here, which seems to be a trend in today's video, apparently. It's a grass and psychic type. Grass is there because it's a seed, even though it doesn't look like one. Psychic is probably just because they have some level of telepathy. It's usually said in the Pokédex that, like, if one of them gets separated from the rest of the group, they can kind of seek it out and they'll get back together again. And the name on this one is basically just... they tried to force an egg pun with an unrelated word. So you have Execute, I'm not sure what that has to do with this Pokemon, and then they put egg in it. The Japanese name is Tamatama. Tamago means egg, so there you go. But it could also mean unexpectedly, which is just Tamatama, so unexpectedly an egg is actually a seed. It might be what they're going for, I couldn't tell you. So, like I said, as for the origin on this thing, it's eggs that are also seeds, and there's a few explanations as to why this may be the case, but I don't necessarily buy any of them. I'm going to actually go ahead and just quote Bulbapedia directly here. It says, Execute might be based on both plant seeds and a clutch of eggs. It is possibly a visual pun on an eggplant, though it may also have been inspired by the egg yolk tomato or the bird's nest fungi. It may also draw inspiration from coconuts, considering Executor's resemblance to a palm tree, and the fact that Execute is hunted by Crabrawler, which may be based on a coconut crab. So if we drop the whole Crabrawler thing, because that's Gen 7, and I really doubt that that really has anything to do with it, I got a few ideas here. The eggplant thing doesn't quite work because that's an English-only pun. In Japanese, the eggplant has a name that has nothing to do with eggs. Egg yolk tomato, bird's nest fungi, I haven't even bothered looking into either of those. It could be one or the other. Coconut thing I could possibly see because Executor does basically have coconuts on it, but these look like pink eggs with the yolk inside them. They don't look like coconuts, so again, it doesn't really work. But again, I'm okay with that. It's weird and I like weird things. So the design on this one always has 6 eggs together. One of them is always broken open, and the other ones have varying degrees of being confident or pissed off or depressed. And I kind of like the personality on that. It's a shame that it always has to be the same every time you encounter one, but that's just the limitation of the games. And it's also kind of weird because the Pokédex says that when the eggs become cracked, they're close to evolution, but Execute doesn't evolve like that. It needs a leaf stone to evolve, so it has nothing to do with like how old they are or whatever, so I don't know where they're coming from with that one. And even if it did evolve naturally, it kind of makes you wonder if the like each one evolves into an Executor, which then has 3 heads, and then if one falls off, it becomes another Execute again. It's weird, and somewhere the math is not working out on this. I feel like something's missing, but I guess it works. I don't know. Weezing is one of several Gen 1 Pokemon, which is an evolution of something that basically either just duplicated or grew another head. We had Dodrio, Magneton, and Dugtrio, which all did the same thing. For Weezing, it's a different kind of idea behind it. Those all had their own reasons for doing it, and in Weezing's case, it's basically supposed to be kind of like a birth defect. Which I guess if it's not born into the state doesn't quite work, but the theme is there and it makes sense, at least in some ways. Because as with coughing, we basically just have a floating balloon full of noxious gases, and it's basically the representation of air pollution, while Grimer was the liquid form of that. As I said back with coughing, there's not really any specific basis behind this one. It looks like some kind of underwater mine or a meteor or something, but it doesn't really have any relation to either of those. I think it's basically just supposed to be an abstract concept of pollution. And I don't know how much study has been done on pollution causing birth defects, but at the very least it was the basis of the show The Oblongs, so obviously we can trust that as a valid source. But no, I don't know. Coughing is always seen as one of the, like, happiest, like, most cheerful-looking Pokemon of Gen 1, despite it being a poison type and not the kind of thing you'd expect with that kind of disposition. And Wheezing is basically the exact opposite, which is exactly why Pokemopolis hated it so much. But it is definitely fitting for it, because if you just kind of grew a second head out of you and this weird, like, bulbous attachment, you probably wouldn't be too happy about it either. And it also kind of makes you wonder why a creature born of pollution is affected by the pollution, but whatever. So, as far as this thing being just kind of like double coughing and just coughing but more so, whatever you want to call it, its role in the anime was basically just, it was under the ownership of James. Like, his coughing evolved relatively early on, and then he had the wheezing around until partway through the Hoenn seasons, and then ended up replacing it. But basically, the only thing it ever did in the show was just kind of create a smoke screen. Everyone would cough for a few seconds, and then that was it. It never really did a whole lot. Nothing that was better than what coughing could do, at least. In the games, it is actually surprisingly worthwhile, though. For a balloon that you'd think would be fairly fragile, like you could puncture it or whatever, it actually has a very high defense stat, and with poison only having two weaknesses, one being ground, which is negated by levitate, it's actually fairly good defensively, and it has more variety in its attacking types than you might expect, because it's got its usual poison attacks, but it can also learn some electric and fire moves. Kind of weird that it can learn fire moves at all, given that you usually don't want to combine fire with gas, because that'll make it blow up, but whatever. But yeah, it's just decent enough design for what it is. English name, fairly straightforward. We had coughing, now we have wheezing. If it ever got an evolution, it would probably be choking. Beta name, I believe I said before, was La, as in LA, Los Angeles, because pollution, haha. And the Japanese name is Matadogas, which you might remember from Melee, because it says it in two voices simultaneously, and it's kind of hilarious. Dogas, or Dogars, or Dogasu being coughing's Japanese name, basically bad or poisonous gas, and Mata just meaning again. It's Dogasu again. Firo is basically a hodgepodge of various different types of birds. It doesn't really resemble any one type of bird all that much. Kind of like the other Gen 1 birds, honestly. Out of the group of them, I have to say Firo is probably my favorite, but that's most likely just due to the fact that I used it in my original Gen 1 team, and the main reason I did that was just because it was the flying type that was used in, like, the demo team shown in the pictures in the strategy guide I had. But it does actually have quite a few, like, positives over Pidgeot, the most notable one being the fact that it evolved so much earlier, because Spearow evolves into Firo at level 20, whereas the Pidgey family, it has to go to 18 and then 36. So it's, by the time you get to the Pidgeot level, the Pidgeotto level, you're almost at the Firo level already. Plus, it just kind of has a better moveset. It's kind of interesting. I've been noticing when looking up a lot of these Pokemon that the Gen 1 movesets are always, like, really anemic. They barely learn anything, and whenever they learn anything good, it's usually way too high. Firo actually learns Drill Peck, which is its best move in the early games at least, at level 34 in Gen 1, whereas in other generations it can be as high as about 47. So they've actually kind of done the reverse. A lot of times they'll make the better moves early available in later games, but here they just kind of made it later for some reason. But it also learns a few dark moves, and as of Gen 5 it gets Drill Run, which is a fairly obscure physical ground type move that is just learned by stuff that has drills, basically. Which I suppose is fitting because it has a really long beak, basically, and it already gets like drill pecks, so whatever, might as well get another drill move. But as for the dark moves, basically Fearow kind of gets a bad rap. It has this like weird role of being the antagonistic bird Pokemon in the anime, and I don't really know why. The Pokedex never mentions anything particularly evil about it, which is even odder given the fact that its Japanese name is Onidrill, with Oni literally meaning evil, and then drill is just drill. So it's like, it's meant to just kind of be the mean counterpart to Pidgeot, but both of them are just birds of prey, and neither of them is really worse than the other, so I don't know, maybe it just was maybe in the Pokemon world, it just kind of became a scapegoat for some reason, and then they just rolled with it. But, the English name is kind of a weird one just because it doesn't look like a sparrow at all, but they wanted to make it rhyme with Spearow, I guess, so they kept that in there, and then they just added in Fear, which, again, kind of ties into the whole evil thing, I guess. But I mentioned before that it has a lot of possible inspirations, and just to go down the list, there's the generic, just kind of bird of prey, like hawk type thing, or a vulture it kind of looks like, without really acting like one. Could be a stork or a crane, because it's got the long neck for it. It has the red comb on top of its head, which chickens have. It has the beak of a snipe. It's basically just a hodgepodge of different ideas, and I see nothing wrong with that. It works well for what it is, but it is outclassed by Dodrio and by other normal flying types in later generations, so good for early game in early generations, kind of got superseded by other stuff later on, though. Okay, sorry if I had to insert some black at the end there, or like the crystal image, because I don't know if the time quite worked out on that one. I think I was a little short. But I'm basically through this area. I wanted to point out this trainer for her dialogue before you start the battle, where she just says, like, if a Pokemon I want is there, I'll go there. That's what a true trainer does, because back during my, like, militant no-trading rampages that I went on around Gen 4, I actually had her quote as, like, my signature on GameFAQs for a while. Also, she mentions that once a week, Pokemon comes to water here, blah blah blah, and that is why I set the date to Friday, because today is actually a Tuesday. Because, look, we're twins, oh my god. But no, for some reason, Lapras is here on Friday. Not sure of the connection, but there it is. They would bring this back in later generations, not with Lapras specifically, but like Drifloon shows up on Fridays in Diamond and Pearl Platinum. I know in like Black White and Black White 2, I think there's like the Jellicent that shows up on certain days, and it's like a different gender depending on version, and there's, I don't know, there's some weird day specific stuff. I don't really understand why they do that, but they do. And so, this is our one way of getting a Lapras in this game without trading it up from Gen 1. Fits well with it being a Pokemon that's supposed to be very rare, because in Gen 1 it was just a giveaway, and here it's kind of obscure. But, anyway, I'm expecting this thing to be kind of an asshole. And, oh, good. Do I have Awakenings? I have one, okay. But yeah, I'm expecting this thing to not stay in the ball. I don't know what its catch rate is, but I doubt it's anything good. So we're gonna go ahead and just start yet another bio here. and I'm gonna go wander around the overworld a bit, collect some items that I've missed, and we'll meet back at Slowpoke Well, I think. Arbok is the evolution of Ekans, and whereas Ekans was just snake spelled backwards, this one is Cobra spelled backwards, except it's spelled with a K instead of a C, presumably just because it looks better that way. And I'd like to point out again that Ekans had the Japanese name of Arbo, which was not specifically a shortened version of Arbok, but rather sort of an anagram of Boa, so it's kind of weird how that one worked out. But Arbok is the same in both languages. But yeah, pure poison type, and obviously based on a Cobra. Basically just, there's multiple types of Cobras. They're all basically just poisonous snakes that have like the hood that they open up to intimidate their prey and whatnot. It could potentially be based off of the Indian Cobra specifically, which kind of has like little eye markings on it. Obviously nothing as drastic as the ones on Arbok. But the eye markings are kind of a point of interest here because the Pokédex specifically points them out as being different depending on the region that it's found in. Actually in Gen 1 specifically, it even says that there's at least 6 different patterns. As of Gen 7, they claim that there's 20 patterns, but they've never really done anything with that. Basically, as far as I can tell, Gens 2 and 3 share a pattern, which is also used in like the original Sukimori art, and every other appearance other than like the manga and occasional obscure artwork is always the same. So they've not really done much with that idea. Even now where Pokemon have like various forms that they can appear in, Arbok's just pretty much always the same, which is a little bit of a shame. But also I've got to admit, like for living dex purposes and collecting different forms, I feel like kind of less is better. I don't really want to have 20 Arbok in my PC, but that's just me. But speaking of the manga having occasionally different patterns, that's a side of the series that I've never really paid much attention to, but apparently Agatha of the Elite Four had an Arbok that had markings that could actually change depending on either its mood or like what it was trying to do in battle. And the manga was also the source of sort of an infamous picture of an Arbok getting cut in half. Apparently it was okay though, because they say that it can just regenerate. Like, as long as the head survives, it can just get its entire body back. Which is decidedly not a thing that real Cobras can do. That would be a starfish, but I guess they just wanted to include that as a little interesting point, so fair enough. But Arbok's most famous role is probably just the fact that Jessie had one in the first few seasons of the anime. It didn't do a lot because it was a Team Rocket Pokemon, so it was basically destined to lose almost every fight. I pretty much just remember it using Poison Sting a lot and occasionally wrapping stuff up. Cobras don't really do that, that's more of a Constrictor Snake thing, but Arbok can do both, why not? But yeah, it just kind of showed up a lot. I'd say it was probably more useful than Weezing, which, as I've mentioned, basically would just show up, lay down a smoke screen, and then not do anything else. At least Arbok would kind of attack stuff, which is kind of the opposite of the games because it has never really been all that great. It does have access to Glare, which is a paralysis move with not the worst accuracy out there, but the rest of its moveset's fairly generic. In the later generations, it at least gets the elemental Fang moves, but other than that, just kind of the usual stuff you'd expect from poison types, mostly. Lapras is a single-stage water and ice type, one of 3 of that type combination in Gen 1, out of only 5 ice types total. And of those 3, I'd actually say that Dugong is the only one that really has any business being an ice type. I don't really understand why Lapras is typed that, because it doesn't really have anything to do with ice, and you very rarely ever find it in locations with ice. The only time you ever do is Fire Red and Leaf Green. But, I don't know, it learns ice-type moves, and I guess they just wanted it to be a little different. Usually in the games, it'll show up in like one location somewhere, and fairly rarely. Sometimes you don't even find it in the wild at all, you just have to get it from somebody. That was the case in Gen 1 at least. it's basically just given to you by some guy in Silphco, and the only reason I can think of why they did that is because that's the part of the game where you'll basically need Surf to continue any further, and Lapras is kind of the go-to Surf Pokemon for whatever reason. I guess it makes more sense to ride on something like this than just a small fish Pokemon that you wouldn't really be able to fit on. Because the Pokedex usually does mention that it's kind of used to like ferry people across the water, and it's just kind of like this useful utility Pokemon. But it's also hunted to to near extinction for some reason. They never really explained why, but that's a thing apparently. I don't know, it's kind of weird. So, I always found Lapras to be sort of an interesting Pokemon. Back when I first got into the series, through the trading cards, it didn't have a card until the fossil set, so I was mostly unaware of it, other than seeing like small, low-quality pictures of it here and there. And I think my first time ever really seeing it any clearer than that was in Pokemon Snap, where it shows up basically off the coast in the beach stage, kind of obscured by fog, and I thought it was kind of cool. It was just like this mysterious Loch Ness Monster type thing way off in the distance. And its first appearance in the anime was in the Jinx episode with Santa, where it just randomly had telepathic abilities, and that has never been shown with it again since, so I don't know what was up with that. But that also kind of made me think that it was something special. Which it kind of is. It does get special treatment occasionally, like it just with the fact that it's the Gen 2 surfing sprite, and it gets like its own unique model if you surf with it in Gen 6 and stuff like that, but it's never gotten an evolution or pre-evolution or mega or any kind of real attention other than that, so I don't know. When Gen 4 first came out, for some reason there was a large number of people that thought that Shellos was a pre-evolution of it. I think I even remember Cerebi mistakenly posting that, which I found weird because Shellos is right before Gastrodon in the Pokedex, and like usually the leaks that I would see would have the entire Pokedex shown, and like you'd be able to see that. And it's like, okay, it obviously evolves into this, but I don't know, some people didn't think that way, I guess. So, as I mentioned, it's basically the Loch Ness Monster, or a Plesiosaur. The original English name was going to be Ness, which makes a reference to that. The Japanese name is Laplas, or Laplace, and so the English name is basically just sort of a romanization of that. And as for what that means, that's kind of anyone's guess. The closest thing anyone's been able to come up with is the French word Laplace, which means seat, because you sit on it. It also sounds like lapis lazuli, and there's a very tenuous link to a mathematician named Pierre-Simon Laplace, who apparently did like research on the sea, but that wasn't really his focus, so I kind of doubt that that's what they were going for. But I don't know, it's just one of those Pokemon that kind of exists, and I'm glad that it exists because I do like it, but other than being Ash's ride in the Orange Island and whining at the beginning of every episode, it never really did a whole lot. Gonna be perfectly honest, I had no idea Poliwhirl was actually here. I was not planning on catching it, but I did, so I guess we're gonna include it in the bios now. So, yeah. Poliwhirl is the evolution of Poliwag, and much like how with Caterpie they had the caterpillar evolve into the butterfly, just like how they metamorphosize in real life. Here we have the tadpole become the just the kind of bigger tadpole. So, wow, what were they thinking? But no, it kind of looks like a frog, but the Pokedex still calls it a tadpole. And I mean, it only very vaguely looks like one. As far as I'm concerned, it's basically just kind of a body, what has a swirl on it, and what animal it is kind of, like, unnecessary. I don't know. Bulbapedia does say that it is supposed to be a glass frog. Back when I talked about Poliwag, I mentioned that the swirl is basically supposed to be like the intestines being seen through the skin, and that basically carries over to this one. Except now, instead of only having legs, it has arms with little Mickey Mouse gloves on it. which apparently changed from, like, gloves with fingers into just mittens at some point around Gen 3. I don't know, whatever. But, I don't know, the main thing to say about Poliwhirl is the fact that it is just kind of... It doesn't really do anything that spectacular, and it's never been a major... Like, it has never had a major appearance in the anime. Like, Misty did have one in the Johto season, but it wasn't, like, at the beginning of the show. And yet, for some reason, it was everywhere in promotional media early on. Like, the cover of Time magazine that first went over the Pokemon craze and how it's, like, capturing your children and converting them to Satanism or whatever the hell it was talking about, basically had the main, like, the cover of it had a Poliwhirl, like, as the main focus, like, overshadowing Pikachu and all the other, like, mascot ones. And, in the Burger King, like, gold-plated card set of the 6, one of them was Poliwhirl for no real reason. It got a bunch of merchandise and, like, it would appear on, like, cereal boxes and just logos and stuff. It was kind of weird. And, so a lot of people would actually say that it was the favorite Pokemon of Satoshi Tajiri, but apparently that's actually Poliwag, so it was close, but not really. So I don't really have a good reason for why it showed up everywhere. I guess it's fairly iconic and marketable, just kind of an inoffensive design, and it looks kind of unique, other than the fact that its other two evolutionary relatives are, like, almost identical to it, but whatever. So, I don't know, that's kind of the main thing about it, really. In-game, it's not all that spectacular. It's just kind of a water type that has access to Hypnosis, just like Poliwag was. It's one of the few that isn't, like, completely aquatic, like, it can walk around on land and stuff, so it's not totally boring, but it's not all that spectacular either. The name is pretty straightforward, just Poliwag and Swirl. The Japanese name is Nyarozo, and then in Poliwag was Nyaromo, which is apparently just taken from the, like, Japanese sound for slithering. Okay, I guess. The English name in the beta was apparently Aquanaut, a little bit more generic than Poliwhirl, but I guess that's not a horrible name. And the only other thing I could really mention about it that's worthwhile is the fact that apparently it was a main Pokemon of Red in one of the manga, possibly more than one of them. I never read any of those or really looked up anything about them, so couldn't really tell you for sure, but I know that that's a thing at least. So I don't know, not the worst Pokemon, but did it deserve as much exposure as it got? Probably not. So, yeah, this was a thing also. Was not expecting random Yanma Swarm, but it happened, so we're adding this one into the list as well. Like, good God. I think we're up to, like, let's see. Once I do this one, this will be number 13 for this video, and I think there's going to be 17 total. So yeah, I already warned you there was going to be very little, like, actual live commentary or anything happening, but, like, good God. I didn't actually expect as much as there has been. So, before I go back into the wonderful world of post-commentary bio crap, let me actually take a moment and look through this PC, and look at all the Pokemon that I've gotten, because I've barely paid any attention to them. Also, I might need to, change boxes, because I'm probably pretty full. Let's see, yeah, okay, well, there's fewer than I expected. So, Weezing, I already talked about at this point, I'm assuming. This one was a frickin' pain in the ass, though, because, the first one I encountered used self-destruct. Second one, I just had to try and get lucky and put it to sleep before it could. Then there's just various stuff in and around Mount Mortar. Shuckle and Staryu we haven't gotten to yet. I would like to point out that this is not the Shuckle from the guy in Firewood. We'll probably still talk to him eventually, but, I don't know. I just kind of wanted to look at their animations, because I had the battle animations turned off, and we haven't had a chance to really see any of them. There's Ursaring playing its invisible guitar. And there's still a whole other, like, half box of these, but I'm not going to switch over to the other box. So, how many are in this one? Nope, we've got room for more. But yeah, gonna check if there's anything that needs Surf and Critique, and then we're just gonna go to Slowpoke Well. I don't expect anything interesting to happen there, but I am looking for a Slowbro, so we'll do that at least, and then maybe I'll actually be back for live commentary once we do Mount Mortar, because that's next on the list. But, yeah, this is, okay, I don't think there's anything to surf to here. If there's other surf areas, someone can mention them later, and yes, I know that there's new bark, but we'll do that at some other point. So, Slowpoke Well it is, and, again, I will be back when I'm back. Joining our ever-growing list of, unevolving, standalone Gen 2 Pokemon, we have Yanma. And, yeah, this one's about as useful as most of the rest of those. Bug Flying has never been a particularly great type. There are a few good Pokemon that have that typing, including Yanma's evolution that it got in Gen 4, but more on that later. But, yeah, it doesn't really work here. Even if it wants to make use of those types for, like, stab damage, it can't really, at least not in the early games. Because in Gen 2, it gets exactly one bug move, which is Leech Life, which is not good, and it only gets it through breeding, mind you. And in Crystal specifically, it can get Wing Attack at a somewhat high level, and that's it. It doesn't get anything else. So it's really not anything that you're going to get any use out of. At least in the later games, it gets the Speed Boost ability, so it raises its speed basically every turn, and it can baton pass that, and it eventually did start getting some decent moves, but yeah, it started out pretty useless. Not to mention that it's a 1% encounter rate that you have to increase through a swarm, so you're probably never going to use this thing in Gen 2. And it's a shame, because it's not a bad design. Obviously it's just a dragonfly. Bulbapedia says it is the red-veined darter. Sure, it might be, I don't know. But, I don't know, I guess, like, there's nothing wrong with it in terms of design. It's just kind of a straightforward dragonfly. I like its big eyes. Kind of looks like a, sort of like an old-style plane. And, what else is there really to say about this one? The only other thing I kind of want to bring up is, well, first of all, the name. Yanma literally means large dragonfly in Japanese. The Japanese name is Yanma, so I don't know why they added the extra yan on there. I guess just large dragonfly, maybe? I couldn't tell you. But, despite the name basically being the same from English to Japanese, it was one of the many Pokemon that fell victim to the weird, like, Gen 2 pre-release name swap, where it was originally known as Dunsparce. I still kind of doubt the validity of these claims, but they were on various websites back in, like, 1999 and early 2000, so they came from somewhere. I assume there's just some person somewhere that got them wrong and it spread, but I find it interesting anyway. And, speaking of those, there were a few earlier that I forgot to give those names on. Wobbuffet was originally called Crashin, Pineco was originally Skarmory, and Ursaring was originally Solor. But, again, I kind of doubt that any of these were really anything. But, as I mentioned, though, in Gen 4, Yanma does get an evolution, Yanmega, or in Japanese, just Mega Yanma, and, it's a lot better. I've not used one before, but I would like to at some point, because it's a pretty cool design. It's basically just, what if we took a dragonfly, but made it really mean and aggressive looking? And it works. Yanma evolves with, by learning Ancient Power, which it gets just at level 33, so it's another thing like Ambipom, where it just, if you level it up and teach it the move, it'll just evolve without you having to go too far out of your way, which is nice. And, the reason it is tied to Ancient Power is because it's basically based off of a prehistoric dragonfly. Back in, like, the dinosaur days, the insects that were around were a lot bigger than they are now, possibly due to higher oxygen levels, and Yanmega reflects that fairly well. Machop is not actually the first fighting type in the Pokedex, that would be Mankey, but it is sort of the embodiment of the fighting type out of Gen 1, or at least that's how I've always felt. or rather its family in general is. There's not that many fighting types, and these are just the ones that are sort of the most classic. Like, you think of a fighting type, you think of this family type of thing. Kind of mirrors the Abra family in that sense, which are sort of the classic psychic types. Plus, they are both 3-stage families ending with a trait evolution, and they're both in pretty much every regional dex. And the other thing that Abra and Machop have going on in common is they're kind of overshadowed by their evolutions a lot. You have a lot of Pokemon where you kind of remember the beginning stage, and then you remember the last stage, but not so much the middle one. I've actually seen a lot more people care about Machoke than Machop in this case. Probably just because the design's not all that great on this one, I feel. I don't really know what they were going for exactly. Like, it's vaguely humanoid, and there are other humanoid Pokemon in Gen 1, so it's not alone in that sense. But it has a tail, which it loses in its evolutions, and that's a little weird. Its head is like vaguely reptilian or dinosaur-y without really fully committing to it. Plus it has like those weird crests on its head, and I don't know what those are supposed to be either. And probably the worst thing about its design is the fact that you can kind of see its ribs sticking out, which to me just makes it look sort of emaciated and not really muscular, so I just feel like it's kind of an odd design overall. It was never really one of my favorites. But then again, I don't usually like these type of fighting types anyway. I just find them a little bit gross looking, honestly. But if you like fighting types, I guess it's not bad. It does represent the type fairly well, as I mentioned. And the Japanese name on this one is Wanriki. Wan meaning arm, Riki meaning strength. Obviously the English name is Macho and Chop. Macho, as I always thought I knew what it meant. I'm just kind of noticing here that apparently in Spanish and Portuguese it meant overly male or chauvinist, and then it just kind of lost that slightly in translation, and now it just means like tough or masculine, which is similar but not exactly the same. But its beta name was actually Karate, like with a hyphen in between, which I find delightfully stupid, and if it had actually kept that name in the final version, I totally would have named one Money A, because it would have just been a good joke. But, yeah, it's just, like I said, it's kind of a forgettable first stage, honestly. It does its job okay, but it's not outstanding. And, the one thing that I usually take away from this family is the lack of a variable moveset. There are a lot of Pokemon that are like this, but I have tried to use Machop and Machoke a few times, and I always just remember it ending up with a moveset of basically nothing but fighting moves. And I looked over its learn set throughout the generations, and it does pretty much only get normal and fighting moves unless you use TMs. Up until Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire specifically, halfway through Gen 6, they finally decided to give it some different moves through level up. It gets Knockoff, which is Dark, and Dual Chop, which is Dragon, which is kind of interesting, and I guess it does make sense because it's chopping, so that one's fitting at least. Also, for some reason, it can learn Fire Blast through TM. I thought that was kind of weird. But, yeah, that's about all I can say on this one. It is very stereotypical fighting type-y, and that's okay, I guess. There's basically 3 types of single-stage Johto Pokemon. There's the forgettable ones, there's the ones that are actually good, which are fairly rare, and then there's the gimmicky ones, and Shuckle's definitely a gimmicky one. It's a Bug and Rock type, which is kind of an interesting combination. We didn't get another one of those for a long time, but its most notable trait is its ridiculous stat spread. So basically this thing can survive a nuclear blast, but it can't cause any damage at all. So it has the highest defense and special defense out of any Pokemon in the game. The HP, attack, special attack, and speed, though, are all either lowest, tied for lowest, or like very close to being the lowest. And so yeah, that does actually mean that even though it has extremely high defense, it doesn't really have the HP to do much with it. but honestly, it doesn't even matter that much, because even with the strongest attacks, it's still going to barely scratch the thing, so it does still take a while to kind of get it down without going through some more obtuse methods of causing damage. So yeah, Shuckle's a bit of an odd one. Plus, if it makes use of various attacks like Power Trick and Trick Room, it can kind of become a bit of a beast that way, but then it becomes a glass cannon because it has no defense to work with. So, other than that, Shuckle's interesting for a few other reasons. One of the things is just kind of what it's based on in general. It's another one of those Pokemon where it's really hard to figure out what they were going for here. The Japanese name is Tsubatsubo. Tsubo means jar, and Fujitsubo means barnacle. So a barnacle is a decent enough guess at what it could be. I've also seen it referred to as a scale insect, or slime mold, or an amoeba, or really just a bunch of different stuff. It also just kind of looks like a turtle if you want to go with the simplistic route. Also, the alleged beta name for it is Octorok, but I kind of doubt the validity of that one. And as for the English name, Shuck could refer to a husk or a pod, and then the ending part of it could come from barnacle or turtle, probably just barnacle though. So yeah, I don't really know what this thing's supposed to be. I don't think anybody really does. It's kind of just a mix of a bunch of different things. The designs on its shell also apparently look like these gourds from China that they'd use to store medicines and stuff, which fits with its lore, because that's kind of what it's known for in universe. Is it ferments berries and creates medicine from them, which you just drink out of its shell. There was a really disturbing episode of the anime where Team Rocket basically got high off of them. Pretty good stuff overall, but that leads into its other strange gimmick, which is the fact that if you give it a berry, in Gen 2 specifically, it can turn it into a berry juice. It's apparently a 1 out of 16 chance that this can happen, and it will only actually ever do this if you've at least visited Goldenrod City once. This is actually coded into the game for some reason, and it's because it's a subroutine of the Pokerus spreading algorithm, which also checks if you've been to Goldenrod for reasons that I don't understand. And there is a very persistent ongoing myth that if it holds the berry juice for long enough, it will turn it into a rare candy, but this has actually been debunked. That does not happen, which is unfortunate. It would be a cool way to farm them, but doesn't work. So yeah, lots of weird stuff going on with this one. One day I might want to try to use one just as a gimmick, but it hasn't interested me enough for me to want to do that yet. Staryu is possibly one of the most original water types from Gen 1, at least in terms of design. I mean, it is pretty much just a starfish, but starfish are kind of weird creatures compared to the other types of fish that a lot of the other Gen 1 water types are based on, so it kind of just wins by default, honestly. It's one of the very few Pokemon with no eyes or anything really resembling an eye. You could argue that the gem in the center, or the core as the game usually calls it, is supposed to be the eye, but I never really saw it that way. I always just kind of saw that as sort of a centerpiece, and that Staryu is completely faceless, but I guess it just depends on how you look at it personally. The name on this one, the star part is obvious. The U could potentially be from the Chinese word for fish, but I always just felt it was part of the, trend with Staryu and Starmie playing off of each other, and then it doesn't really have any particular meaning. I don't know, the fish thing does make sense, though. And the Japanese name is Hitodeman. Hitode means starfish, and then man is just man. Apparently there's some kind of connection between Staryu and Ultraman that some people believe, possibly dealing with, the flashing core that it has, and the, action poses that it strikes, and the fact that in the anime it just kind of goes "ha!" instead of saying its name, which most other Pokemon do. So it could be there. I don't know if it was intended, though, and I don't know anything about Ultraman, so I couldn't really say. As far as it being original out of other water types, that pretty much only just goes design-wise, though. Moveset-wise, it's pretty plain, other than the fact that it gets Recover, is what I would say if we were only referring to the early generations. However, it got a lot weirder as time went on. Mainly in Gen 3, it got Camouflage, and was the only Pokemon to get that, and it kind of spread to a few other things eventually, but it's a very obscure move. It basically just changes your type to match whatever type of environment you're in. It's kind of situational and weird. And then in Gen 5, it got Reflect type, which is possibly the most obscure move. I don't know, there's probably some stuff from Gen 6 and 7 that beat that one out, but have you ever heard of Reflect type? Because I've only ever heard of it in the context of it being an obscure move. It just turns you into the same type as your opponent, and it originally belonged to only Staryu, Latios, and Mew. Apparently now Tentacruel also gets it. I don't know, it's kind of weird. But it also gets some stuff like Power Gem, and apparently it gets Psychic now, which kind of is a hint towards the fact that it evolves into a Psychic type. But, I don't know, it's one of those Pokemon that I've just kind of skipped over, and someday I'll probably get around to using it, but it's just always eluded me for some reason. Also worth noting is the fact that in Fire Red and Leaf Green, it randomly, retroactively became a version exclusive counterpart to Shelter. And that carried over into X and Y and literally no other games. It's kind of weird. And in that case, Staryu is available in Leaf Green, whereas Shelter is in Fire Red. And Staryu was already in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, so it kind of got the raw end of the deal on that one. And the same thing happened with Sandshrew and also Vulpix, where like all three of those were in the Hoenn games and then also in Leaf Green. So I always felt that Leaf Green was kind of the worst of the two versions for that reason. But it did get Bellsprout and Slowpoke, which were exclusives that weren't in Hoenn, so I don't know, I guess it's kind of balanced. But I'm getting off subject, so yeah, Staryu, it's a thing. Alright, I believe that is the last one of the video. I hope that was all 17. Again, I don't want to turn all of the, like, live commentary into me just talking about the post-commentary, because that's stupid, but, basically what I was doing there is, I have a timer open on the phone that, tracks, like, basically I'd time 4 minutes for the bio, and then I'd, like, start the next one. I had my DS open next to me, with the, like, notepad thing open so that I could make tallies saying, like, how many I've done. I was writing down, like, the Pokemon that I was doing the bios of as I did that, trying desperately to remember what order they were supposed to go in, and because new stuff kept popping up, I had to keep changing the list. There was a point very early on in the video where the DS went on, like, low battery, and I had to actually, like, when I threw the Pokeball to catch the Wobbuffet, I had to, like, jump up and run across to the other end of the, like, to a different room to get the DS charger, come over here and plug it in. Just all sorts of good stuff happening overall. But, so, there's actually not going to be much left in this one other than me just finishing going through Mount Mortar, and I'm about to put up a Super Repel because this is getting stupid. I think I have, like, one Repel. I'll use it, at least. Let's see. Yeah, let's get this, speed this up slightly. I'm noticing there's items in here that I don't know how to reach. I probably have to come back in from a different direction. Let me actually pull up a map of this real quick and verify that. Yeah, Mount Mortar's a little weird because it's just one of those areas that is never really required for anything, and Johto actually has quite a few of those. It's like, I always kind of liked that about the region. I'm sorry, I know I'm sitting on nothing here. I'm trying to Google a map real quick. Here, I think this will work. Let's see. Which map am I even on? Can I get any further? No. I have to go through a different section to get further. Okay. But yeah, it's like, basically everything I've been doing in this video is random side content. Like, the entire lower area of Union Cave is just there for Lapras and some trainers. Dark Cave is completely worthless. Like, I was touching on that earlier, but just, like, everything I explored in there is everything I have access to now. Like, there's another section of the cave, but it serves even less of a purpose. So, here's Suicune. And also some apricorn trees. Do I have Firo with me still? Yeah, you know what? Let me grab one of these at random. Green, okay. I think that's Friend Ball? I want to say. But, yeah, I've not done anything with these up to this point because they're almost all useless. For a proper showcasing of Gen 2, I really should at least show what they are, though. Can you give me a thing? Oh, okay, well there's a lure ball. I guess I'll use that later on. I forgot, he gives you a free one early on, I never talked to him. But yeah, he can only, Oh, can he make multiples? That I didn't know. Okay, maybe I should actually grab some more of these. I didn't want to keep grabbing the apricorns, or however you say it, because they just take up inventory space, and I figured I'd never use them, but... Yeah... Like I said, I could just kind of talk about all 7 of them now, but I'll do that at some other point. I guess the only other thing to really talk about in this video, before we finish it up, because I'm not doing anything in Mahogany Town. If I do, if I go to Mahogany, I'm not going north of it, because there's new Pokemon, and I don't want to catch anything new in this video. But, I think I talked about this a bit in a recent stream, but I don't remember how... Oh yeah, I can't do this at all. Well, there's a staircase, at least. Okay, what am I saying? God damn it, everything distracts me. Fuck off! No! It's another new Pokemon. Why? Oh god. Can we say it? No, let's get this one out of the way. Whatever, we'll do Seaking, sure. Let's make it 18. Seaking is the evolution of Goldeen, and my god, do we have a generic one here. With a lot of other water types, I keep saying, like, at least they're not just a generic fish, and Seaking is basically the embodiment of generic fish. Goldeen was also, but here we have a final evolution, so it's a little less, like, ignorable, I guess. Basically, it's just kind of the go-to boring water type, which is kind of why I think it's hilarious that it's named Seaking. Like, it's the king of the seas, but it's really, really bland and lame. Like, they kind of spent that name a little bit too early, I feel, but whatever. The Japanese name of this one is Azumao. That comes from the type of goldfish that it's based on, the Azuma nishiki. And apparently Mao comes from Devil King, though I don't know why, I guess just because it has a horn. It's another one of those Gen 1 Pokemon that just has a horn for no reason. Bulbapedia says it could possibly be because of the fact that, like, the Hindu god Vishnu can be depicted as a fish with a horn, but I think that's kind of a stretch. So, what is there to say about Seaking? There's a meme involving it, and I think it's fairly inexplicable. I looked it up on Know Your Meme, and there was no kind of reason given for how that one started, so your guess is as good as mine. I think it's just a parody because Seaking is so lame that it like, just kind of getting overly excited over one showing up and, like, having it do, like, massively destructive things, like destroying cities, is just kind of ironically funny. I don't know. But, yeah, as far as what this thing can do, it's not completely without anything to make it stand out, it's just usually not much. In Gen 1, it was the only Pokemon to learn Waterfall, and then in Gen 2 onward, that became an HM, but it was the only one to learn it naturally, at least. Gen 2, it was able to get Psybeam through breeding, which is kind of interesting. I didn't realize that. It's not the most powerful move, and it doesn't get stab or anything, but it's at least something that isn't a normal water or ice attack. Starting in Fire Red and Leaf Green, it gets Mega Horn, which is a good move, but in those games, it doesn't get it until freaking level 69. And in other games after that, it slowly kind of lowers its requirements a bit until eventually in Gen 6, you can just... It's one of those level 1 moves that you can just get with a Heart Scale if you have it. Gen 4, it can get Poison Jab through a Heart Scale, so again, we're just kind of slowly adding in some type coverage. In Black and White 2, it can get Drill Run through the move tutor, so that's a ground move. And Gen 7's where it gets kind of interesting. It gets Smart Strike, which is a steel move, through a TM, but also Throat Chop as a move tutor. So yeah, I'm just imagining this giant fish like flopping up and freaking karate chopping you in the throat. And it's kind of an amazing visual, and now I feel like somebody has to animate that. I have no idea why it gets this move. But, that's pretty much Sea King for you. Apparently its prototype name in the Red-Blue beta was Neptune, which is possibly even more generic than Sea King, but I don't know, they're about on par with each other. And, yeah, I think it looks okay, but it really does just kind of look like a real fish with a horn and weird vampire fangs for some reason. I don't get what's up with those. Okay. Nothing new after this point, right? I'm pretty sure Machoke doesn't show up in this area. I think it's only in the floor that you can access with Waterfall. God, there's like so many Pokemon that I don't even know exist around here. Anyway, I was gonna start talking about the like Let's Play Gaming Expo that we went to a couple weeks ago, at least briefly. I think I'm just gonna hold off on that until next time, honestly, because this video is almost over, and I know that I'm gonna be going through some like Team Rocket bullcrap soon that's not gonna be particularly interesting. So I can save it for then, not that there's even a whole lot to talk about, but I'll find something, I guess. So, I think we're just gonna wrap this area up, pretty much. I'm just trying to make sure I've got all the items down here. And, yeah, basically just trying to check my map here, because screw getting through this place normally. Did I find everything? I might have. I think I might have. Yeah, I think that might have actually already done everything, but we'll do another sweep of it just in case. So, for the record, the stuff that I'm still missing, besides Pokemon, there's at least, possibly some unknown ruin stuff I can check. I haven't even tried to catch the other 25 unknown shapes. I'm saving that until, like, the end. But, yeah, it's like the one that I did off-screen with the Omanite puzzle, the extra puzzle you could do to get into, like, the secret room says water. I'm pretty sure you have to have a water stone in your inventory and, like, use it. I don't think Mystic Water works. I got the Mystic Water after that section, so I didn't test it. But, there's at least that one. There's one that requires Ho-Oh, so I obviously can't do that yet. I think I did the one with the escape rope. I might have done the one with Flash, I don't remember. But, I feel like I'm basically caught up with almost all the other overworld stuff that I can do. And as far as Pokemon go, I've already mentioned Butterfree and Beedrill. I'm just kind of gonna wait on those. I might get one of them from the bug catching contest, because I have to get another Sunstone, but it's not a major priority of mine. Still waiting on a call for Quillfish. That's the only other Swarmer that I need. What else? Is that it? I feel like there's other stuff. I'm trying to... There's Raikou and Entei, of course, but I mean, I don't expect to get those anytime soon. I've got everything else from Headbutting Trees. I think I've got all the, like, rare encounters and fishing stuff. There might be some surfing stuff. Obviously, I didn't know about Poliwhirl or Sea King, and those showed up anyway, but... I don't know, there's probably not any more. Or more accurately, there probably are like 700 more, but I don't know what they are. So we can't get into this gym until we deal with the whole Team Rocket thing. This whole section of the game kind of drags a bit. Like, you have the, you have Chuck followed by Jasmine with, like, nothing in between. And then, you have basically Team Rocket stuff, then Price, then more Team Rocket stuff, then getting to this route. This guy here is basically the only reason, like, you know what, sure, why not? Yeah, this guy here is the reason that I have to play through as much of Gold as I do, because I still need a Gold-Silver exclusive Pokemon for him over there. Anyway, Dana, I don't care. Unless you're giving me a free Evolution Stone, you can't tell me anything that I care about. Is this the... no. What is this? Everybody's going on about that Gyarados, and the radio, and Team Rocket, and I wonder if all this stuff is connected somehow. Definitely not. But yeah, up here is Route 43, I think. Like I said, I think there's at least a couple encounters there that are going to be new Pokemon I don't have, so we're going to hold off on those. God, the music in here. What the hell is this music? Clearly, buying these tiny mushrooms is a good idea. Do these do anything? I mean, I know the tiny mushroom is just for selling. I don't know if the Slowpoke tail does anything. Probably not. Well, that was Mahogany Town. I'm so glad I came here. And I guess just to be thorough about doing everything that I possibly can, I think Mom might have bought me a doll at some point. I kind of want to see what it is. Let's see. Oh. Alright, I'll take it. And I guess that's about it. Alright. How much money do you even have? I'm gonna let you keep it anyway, because you might buy me stupid shit that I don't care about, but whatever. Yeah, you've got a fair amount. But that's fine. But, yeah, ever since getting Surf, I have had the ability to go over here, I just haven't wanted to do it. Because it's a fairly, like, noteworthy event, and there's no reason to go over here until much later in the game, but we'll do it now just to stretch out the video a little bit longer, because clearly it's not long enough as it is, and the hour and a half of Sea King is a fish, Graveler is a rock, like, that didn't go on long enough. So, yep, if you had never been spoiled, I imagine this would have been a pretty cool moment, because, lo and behold, it is Kanto, except I don't think it was ever actually called that in the original games. I don't think they gave a name to the area. They just kind of retroactively gave it one in this because they had to call it something new. Like, Johto had a name, so that they give it a name too. I don't know. And again, I always say Kanto, but I'm fairly sure it's pronounced Kanto, because it is based off of an actual part of Japan in real life. But, I don't know, whatever. I didn't really have any conclusion to that sentence, so it just sort of trailed off. What do we have over here? Can we dump shit? Can I dump this berry? Here. Eat a berry. I can't possibly just hold this candy in my hand, or, like, stick it in a pocket or anything. That would be too difficult. And the thing is, I know I'm going to run out of space as soon as I go into Tojo Falls also, because I think there's a Moonstone I can get in there. But, yeah, we're just kind of at this point wandering around and being like, hey, look, here's another thing I can't do. But yeah, I apologize for the massive quantity of bullshit in this video. But I suppose it had to happen at some point. I kept saying over and over throughout this playthrough that I had all these Pokemon I wanted to go back and catch, so there, we got them out of the way. I'm still not sure how I'm going to handle evolutions of things once I start running out of things I can catch in the wild and have to just start leveling crap up. Because I'd really want to put that off until I have access to, like, the Elite Four, so I can get experience off of them. Or at the very least, like... Yeah, I can't hold this. Here, let me, let's see. Antidote. Clearly I'll throw away that King's Rock, it's not useful at all. We'll give this to somebody to hold. And then pick this up, and I'll just do some item management off screen. But yeah, that's basically it. All I'm saying is once I get into Kanto, there's not going to be many new encounters, so maybe I can do them then. Honestly, I'd rather train off of wild Pokemon at Mount Silver than the Elite Four, but I guess I can do either. The problem with battling the Elite Four is that they might actually be challenging, and it'll, like, overlevel my own team. But, whatever, we'll worry about that when we get there. So here we are back in Mahogany, and next time we will do some exploring, check out an angry lake of some variety, and, that's about it. No. See you in 6 weeks when we do that. Slowbro is one of the evolutions of Slowpoke, definitely the easier to get of the two since it's just a regular level up evolution. And it is also our first case of a Pokemon hybrid, where like basically two fuse together to form something new. Although in terms of like game mechanics, it does absolutely nothing with this concept, and that's only ever mentioned in like the Pokedex lore and stuff. So here we have basically a Slowpoke that was bitten on the tail by a Shelder, and then the Shelder dramatically changed shape, but nothing was ever really said of this, and the Shelder was not made into its own Pokemon or anything. And the Slowpoke doesn't really change a whole lot other than getting some stripes on its belly and usually stands up on 2 legs. There was a whole episode of the anime dedicated to this, and it basically said that like it's a symbiotic relationship that benefits both sides because now the Slowbro can use moves like Mega Punch, even though that's not a move that it learns naturally, so I don't know. But back with the Slowpoke review, I mentioned how it could be based off of a number of different things, like an otter or a hippo or possibly a salamander. Here, it's basically a Sazai Oni. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but a Sazai is a turban-shaped shell, sort of like a spiral shell, and the Sazai Oni is basically a mythological creature based off of that is basically just sort of a monster emerging from the turban shell, and they take a number of different forms, and there's a lot of weird folklore behind them. They're kind of like a succubus in some ways, or they are known for, like, stealing men's testicles. Don't even frickin' get into that. Japan folklore is weird sometimes. But, that's basically what this one is based on, and if you've ever followed Digimon at all, which I never really did, there's one in that series called Shellmon that is very reminiscent of Slowbro because they're both just kind of large pink things sticking out of a spiral shell, and there were definitely a lot of people back in the early days of the series that probably thought one was ripping off the other, when in reality they're both just kind of based off of the same thing. So, as for the Shelder part of this, it doesn't really get a whole lot of attention, but apparently in the Gen 2 beta, it was going to be its own Pokemon, called Taban, or probably just Turban. I don't usually talk about the beta stuff, but this one I figured was relevant enough to bring up. The data basically just shows it being its own thing. I don't know what its moveset would have been or anything like that, or how you would have gotten it. It would have been interesting to see a way to basically have de-evolution, where the Slowbro reverts back to a Slowpoke, but then the Shelder stays as like the evolved spiral shell shape. Would have been neat, but no, it's just a regular level up evolution, so it like doesn't really work that way. So, the other thing about Slowbro worth bringing up is the fact that in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire, it randomly got a Mega Evolution that I don't think anybody ever asked for. It's basically just Slowbro, but more so. It's just Slowbro now getting, like, taken over by the shell even more, to a point where it's basically completely, like, engulfed by it. And, it's generally pictured by just kind of, like, standing up on the tip of its tail, which I find weird because there's no way the tail would be able to support it. It always seemed fairly squishy and, like, not really a good thing to stand on. But whatever. And the Mega Evolution basically is just a massive increase to defense, and its ability is Shell Armor, which prevents critical hits, which I guess is slightly more useful than Oblivious or Own Tempo, but still not the most amazing ability out there. So, I think competitively it's not bad, but definitely not one of the more exciting Mega Evolutions.